When we picture the American Revolution, we see the famous paintings. George Washington crossing the Delaware, the signing of the Declaration, but the full story is much bigger and much more complicated. What about the people who fought for freedom they didn't even have themselves? And in that fight, some unlikely heroes step forward, people in history paintings and books don't always mention, but whose stories deserve to be told. I'm Kiri Alexander, and this is their story. By the fall of 1777, things weren't looking so great for the Americans. General Howe and the British Army marched right into Philadelphia in September, forcing Congress to flee the city. For the revolutionaries, losing Philadelphia was a huge blow. This was the largest city in the colonies and the political center of the rebellion. Washington tried to strike back at the Battle of Germantown on October 4th, 1777. The plan was bold, but in the chaos fog, miscommunication, and friendly fire, the Americans were pushed back. Philadelphia stayed in British hands. But here's the catch. Even though the British controlled the city, they didn't fully control the waterways. Fort Mercer in New Jersey and Fort Mifflin in Pennsylvania blocked their access to the Delaware River, which was the supply line the British desperately needed. That meant the fight for these forts suddenly became critical. On October 22nd, 1777, at Fort Mercer in Redwick, New Jersey, the British sent about 1,200 Hessian soldiers to crush the fort. Waiting for them were only around 400 American defenders. And among those defenders were soldiers from the 1st Rhode Island Regiment, one of the first integrating units in American history, where black and white soldiers fought side by side. Against all odds, they won, and it slowed down British control of Philadelphia. But the story of how they even got there is a battle in itself. Now, here's the complicated part. When George Washington took command in 1775, the rules were clear. No black men, free or enslaved, could enlist. In fact, Washington tried to remove those who were already serving. The reason? Fear. Many leaders were terrified of arming enslaved people, but the war wasn't going the way they planned. Washington needed more troops, and at the same time, the British were offering freedom to enslaved people who joined their side. That changed everything. So by early 1776, free black men were officially allowed to stay in the Continental Army. Then, in 1778, Rhode Island took it a step further. They passed a law allowing enslaved men to enlist in the 1st Rhode Island Regiment. Their reward for service? Freedom. For these soldiers, picking up a musket wasn't just about independence from Britain. It was a fight for their own personal liberty, a chance to force a new nation to confront its own ideals. To understand the full story, we need to talk to someone who has literally dug into the past. I spoke with Dr. Jennifer Janoski, historian at Rowan University and director of Red Bank Battlefield Park. First question is, so you and your team, you guys found artifacts at the site of Fort Mercer. What do those artifacts, what can they tell us?
One of the great things about archaeology is all the material that we find really helps us tell a more nuanced story of the individuals who were at this site. So we find things from the Revolutionary War battle that took place here, like musket balls, buckles, buttons. The personal items, like the buttons and buckles, help bring out a more humanistic vision of this battle. So they're not just soldiers, these are human beings. And what can these artifacts tell us about what their experience was like at Fort Mercer? Archaeology is really important because it helps us understand what stories we should be telling here and how we can preserve the park. In 2022, during one of these routine archaeology projects, we discovered the remains of 15 Hessian soldiers who lives were lost at the Battle of Red Bank in 1777.
What was going on in the war around the time of the Red Bank Battle?
Sure. So in the fall of 1777, Philadelphia falls to the British. The British have to take the city by land because the Delaware River was not accessible. There's a series of river obstructions that the Patriot forces had sunk to keep the British ships from accessing Philadelphia. British ships were just south of where we are now, chomping at the bit to get into Philadelphia because winter is coming and the British soldiers need supplies. And so the British are getting into a pretty desperate situation. They know that they have to get the supplies into the city. They know that they have to take out the river fortifications, and they turn their attention to Fort Mercer first in October of 1777.
Between the soldiers soldiers, there was a very big difference in number. The British had more than the Americans did. How did the American soldiers, how were they able to defeat the British?
That's a great question. So we're talking really about Hessian soldiers who are attacking Fort Mercer. There's only a couple of British officers assigned to those to that group. The other thing to keep in mind is that these Hessian German forces are premier fighting forces in the 18th century. Many of them are professional soldiers. They travel around the world fighting in armed conflicts. And so they are a really intimidating group of people, especially if you are the Rhode Island Regiment who's defending Fort Mercer. We're talking about American troops that haven't seen a lot of battle, don't have a lot of battle experience. And one of the things that they did here at Fort Mercer to help fortify Fort Mercer is to bring in a French engineer to sort of reconfigure the fort. So the French engineer basically lops off a third of the fort to the northern part of it and makes it accessible to the Hessian soldiers, and so sort of inviting them into the fort. They then concentrate their firepower at that spot. So when the Hessians come into the fort, they start screaming, "Victoria, Victoria, we've penetrated the fort is ours." And then they realize that they've fallen into a trap, and there's a horrific loss of Hessian life in that space. And it was a very effective strategy that the French had used.
So during this battle, we had black soldiers, we had white soldiers fighting side by side. What do you think this tells us about the definition of freedom during the American Revolution?
The Rhode Island Regiment is really interesting. It has Native American soldiers, African American soldiers, and white soldiers. And at this time, it's a fully integrated fighting force. So as you just said, they're literally fighting side by side for America's freedom. And this is the great contradiction, the great paradox of the American Revolution. While they're fighting for freedom, America didn't necessarily see them as free or as equal. But I think that's what makes these battlefields so interesting. They didn't wait for emancipation to fight for freedom. That seed is planted at places like Red Bank Battlefield Park. When they're fighting for freedom, this becomes the battle cry for using Black troops in the Civil War, for using Black troops in World War I, in World War II. Remember, we fought at the Battle of Red Bank, one of the greatest upset victories of the American Revolution. And that becomes the rallying cry for them to be included in America's fighting forces.
Why do you think it's so important for students or just for people in general to hear about stories like this that aren't usually in textbooks?
You usually don't see it in any history textbooks. And I think it's one that we can see ourselves in this battle. Because when we think about the American Revolution, we're always thinking about people like George Washington. And I don't think most people can really identify with him, but we do identify with ordinary people. And the Rhode Island Regiment, they were ordinary people. Christopher Green, you won't find really his name in a textbook, commanded a garrison that successfully defeated overwhelming men and firepower. And, that story to me is a story of tenacity, of courage, of strength. Liberty wasn't some abstract thing to them that day. They very much knew that their lives could end that day. And that tells us how much they believed in that revolutionary cause.
You mentioned that there were also Native American soldiers and there are Black soldiers in this regiment. What do you think that this says about the promise of liberty during the American Revolution?
It's a really great question. The promise of liberty is everything. Nobody knows how this thing is going to end. You have to pick a side. Those individuals sided with the promise of America. And I think that's a really powerful moment. Again, it's not an abstract thing. Liberty is very tangible. Equality is like on their fingertips. And they are here to show that they too want to be a part of this incredible American experiment.
In the entire American Revolution, an estimated 5,000 Black soldiers fought for American independence, while the British promise of freeing enslaved people led 20,000 Black men, women, and children to risk everything for the British cause. The Battle of Red Bank reminds us that freedom has never come easy, and that the people who fought for it didn't all look the same or come from the same background. Black soldiers, both free and enslaved, made incredible sacrifices, choosing to fight for a country that didn't see them as equals. And after the war, many Black veterans found that the promises of freedom were inconsistent. Their courage on this battlefield and across the Revolution inspired others to keep pushing for the freedom that was promised, but not yet delivered. And they weren't alone. Native Americans, women, and people from all walks of life played important roles in winning independence. Their stories are often left out of paintings and textbooks, but they're part of the foundation of this country. The men of the 1st Rhode Island Regiment showed us what true bravery looks like, fighting not just for America's freedom, but for the hope of their own. Their legacy reminds us that democracy is built by all of us, and it's up to every generation to carry that work forward.